Redefining Medtech shares the stories of clinicians, executives, inventors, entrepreneurs, and researchers who are transforming healthcare through the development of medical technology. Through our in-depth interviews, digital health leaders will share their journeys, offering you insights into cutting-edge technologies and how to integrate them into your practice. This is Redefining Medtech. I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Cory Kidd, an expert in AI technology and founder and CEO of Catalia Health. Welcome to MedTech. I am so thrilled to have with us today Dr. Cory Kidd, an AI expert and founder and CEO of Catalia Health, who happened to bring along with him his friend Mibu, who we'll get to know a little bit better shortly. Thank you so much for joining us today, to both of you.
Thanks for having us here.
So you're an expert in AI, huh?
You know, it's something I've done for a long time, so there's always more to learn, though.
Okay. So tell us how AI is going to impact the future of medicine.
Well, you know, AI in general is a very broad field. And there are a lot of things that we try to use AI for to, improve how we solve problems in ways that people do. I mean, that's kind of the foundation of AI. And the way I think about AI in medicine is, one more thing in our toolkit. Medicine has involved a lot of technology over, let's say, the last century, right? From things like drugs to devices to, some of it goes back even older. The stethoscope is a piece of technology. AI is one of those things that we're starting to use in many different places. Some of it is going to be very explicit in terms of where we see it and how we use it. There's a robot sitting here blinking in between us, right? Some of it's going to be hidden in the background. AI algorithms that are embedded in something in the EHR, and when a clinician is typing something in, they might get a suggestion, or something is checking drug interactions in the background, for example. So we're going to see AI all over the place in the next few years in medicine.
So as founder and CEO of Catalia Health, can you tell us a little bit about your friend Mibu here and what the product does?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with the overview of the company. So we're a chronic disease care management company. Okay, and that concept is not new. We do that at scale right now with patients, and there's usually two ways that it's done. So what we're talking about is the care that happens after someone leaves the doctor's office or the hospital, following up on chronic conditions. And today we're either sending someone out to the home, right, the home health model, or very frequently calling a patient on the phone, a nurse or a doctor or a pharmacist, and following up. And that's great, right, to be able to do that, but it's expensive, right? It's hard to have enough people and enough time to do that. And so in a lot of cases, we're talking to a patient maybe once a month. Oh, hey, how are you doing, right? How's everything been going? And if it's something that happened 2 or 3 weeks ago, it's hard to solve that problem now. And what we're doing is taking a very different approach to delivering the same kind of care. And obviously there's a little bit of technology involved. I'll have her say hi in a minute. But the foundation of what we do is really around the medicine, of course, and the psychology. So really looking at how do we more successfully engage patients, and that's where this comes in. So I could talk in a minute more about the why of the psychology here, but let me just have her say hi really quickly.
Hello there, I'm Mibu, a wellness coach from Catalia Health. I help people stay engaged with their treatment program and on top of their medications. Can I tell you more about what I do?
All right, before she does that, I'll tell you a little bit. She could go on for a while here.
So, she's a female.
yeah, she is. So the background work that I've done over the last 20 years is really looking at the psychology of how people interact with technology. Obviously, there's technology involved, but really the foundation is psychology. And we know in medicine that a lot of care is delivered face to face. Yeah, the reason that we go to conferences is to have that face-to-face interaction with people. The reason that we see so many of our patients in the office or in the hospital, face-to-face makes a difference. The psychology behind that shows us what those differences are versus calling someone on the phone or a video conference or sending an email. And that's that we create a stronger relationship that'll last longer. We're more engaged in the conversation and a number of other things. And it turns out those differences actually carry over into the world of technology. In other words, we put something like this in front of a patient, and if I turn her, she'll actually find your face and make eye contact here. when we do that, we get those psychological effects of face-to-face interaction that we're never going to achieve if we do the same thing through, say, a smartphone or a tablet-based application, even if it looks the same, right? We draw this on the screen or we use text or video. This really makes a difference. And so, when we're looking at how we solve these problems at scale with patients, this is the interface that we use for those reasons.
So what led to the development of Mibu?
So I've been working in healthcare technology for almost a quarter century now.
Wow.
Been building this stuff for a long time. Initially, it was a lot of the challenges around, as we age, how do we help people live at home longer? So building all different forms of technology, for an aging population. And then I really started to focus in on some of the challenges around chronic disease management. And part of that is just the demographics. The numbers are huge. If we look at all adults across the US or most developed nations, we have about 50% of people dealing with a chronic condition on an everyday basis. And while so much of healthcare has advanced over the last few decades in terms of pharmaceuticals or devices and procedures and practices that we do with patients, the part that happens after we leave the clinic or the hospital, that hasn't changed much. We've tried, but we haven't been very successful. And so what I've been focused on for the last 17 or 18 years is really how do we help to solve those problems? And so for me, that's been the motivation. This happens to be a piece of technology that can help to contribute to the solutions there.
How are practitioners and providers accepting bringing this type of technology into their office?
Well, I think it's really uneven right now. As with any new technology, it takes a long time to get things into practice for a number of reasons. One is, when we're practicing medicine, some pieces of it haven't changed in a very long time. The things that do change tend to change fairly slowly, right? And when we're introducing some, new technology into that, it can take quite a while to get there for a number of reasons. Some of them are on the, the technology side of it. We're gathering a lot of information from patients every day about what's going on with them. How do we get that information, just from a technology perspective, back to the clinician, whether that be the doctor or the pharmacist or the nurse that's following up? But a lot of it actually comes down to workflow. Right, and changing workflow in medicine is challenging. This is somewhere where, as a company, we spend a lot of time thinking about and working on. Obviously, we're also building technology that we're putting out in patients' homes, but getting that back into clinical practice, making that data actionable by the clinician is something that is really important to do, but also takes a long time to get there.
There's an obvious benefit for the patient, but for the practitioner itself, to have this information and have that other support member, that member of their support team assisting them with obtaining this information. So to me, it's a no-brainer, and she's absolutely adorable. So let's go ahead and discuss a little bit about, how you conceive this and the studies behind it, and what the science and the studies showed you in terms of aesthetically, designing this adorable little yellow, creature.
Yeah. So I'll talk about a couple parts of that really quickly.
Sure.
One are some of the background studies that, trying to understand where this technology might fit in. There were several years worth of studies looking at comparing and contrasting people interacting with robots, right, technology like this, versus a couple other things. One is screen-based interfaces. The field of human-computer interaction has been around for 60 or 70 years now. We know a lot about what's happening when people are interacting with something on a screen. And the other is looking at people interacting with one another, right? And of course, psychology has been around for much longer. We know a lot about that. When we're face-to-face with someone, we were talking about this a minute ago, we're more engaged, we create stronger relationships, are going to last longer. What those early studies found is that those differences do carry over into the world of technology. Putting this in front of a patient that can, look me in the eyes when I talk to her, we start to get those psychological effects. Now, when we were designing this specific robot, we went to IDEO, the big design firm, and gave them a very simple design brief that we were going to work together with them on in creating this, and that was 3 things. It needs eyes, right? For the reasons we talked about. That's a very engaging thing. We can have a conversation with someone while we just kind of stare off in the distance and never look them in the face, and we could still have that conversation, but the person who's not being looked at is going to
the trust factor is not there.
The trust factor, you're going to go away thinking that person's a little bit weird. Right, so that eye contact is important, along with some other subtle features here, but that's the biggest one. We need a big screen on it. Most of the interaction here is through voice. Right? She's talking to me, I can respond by talking to her. Many of our patients are older, right? As we age, of course, maybe our eyesight or our hearing is not as good. One thing that I've found over decades of building technology for an aging population is if we can both hear and see at the same time, it makes it a lot easier. It turns out it makes for a much more natural interaction. And the third thing, roughly the size of a kitchen appliance. We could build this the size of a cell phone. So they get tossed into a closet or a drawer and lost, right? We could build it the size of you or me, but then it's going to take up too much space in our home. So this is about the right size. So in terms of the specifics for this product, there are a bunch of ways we could have gone in terms of the look or the color or other aspects of it, but we focused in on the things that we know make a difference in terms of outcomes.
And the ease of use?
So the setup process when a patient gets one of these, so they get it from the mail, usually from us. They take it out of the box and plug it into power. That's it. Okay? There's no other setup involved. She'll wake up about a minute later and say, oh, hey, nice to meet you. Right? And everything is through conversation. So we try to make it really easy for anyone to use.
And is it pre-programmed with the information regarding that specific user?
Yes and no. Okay, so when we ship these out, it's identical for every patient. Okay, and in that first bit of that very first conversation, she's going to do something very similar to if you call your doctor's office, right? They're going to say, oh, can you confirm your date of birth or your medical record number, or, whatever that particular clinic uses. She'll do the same thing, right? Because that's the information we have on that patient, and we want to make sure that she's talking to the right person. Once she does that, then she's going to download all that patient's relevant information. And we don't know a lot about that patient to start off. We know what disease state we're helping them with. We know what treatment they're doing. Everything else we're going to learn through those conversations. Kind of like going to see, a new doctor or nurse. You walk in, they've got your record, right? They know something about you, but they're going to start off by introducing themselves and, asking you about your story, right? They want to get to know you. Same kind of thing is happening here. So we're really learning about that patient over time.
So how many iterations of the design did you have?
It depends on how you want to count. The studies that I was just talking about were done 17 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
The first ones, yeah. The first randomized controlled trial of putting something like this out in the real world was almost a dozen years ago now. As a company, this particular company that I've started, Catelleya Health, is about 4 years old, and we've been constantly iterating and evolving on this product and the overall service that we provide to patients. In terms of the physical part of it, this has stayed the same for a few years. Right? We're designing a new version of this now, but it will look very similar. The software is constantly changing. We're always learning more about our specific patients, about patients in general, and we're incorporating that into what we're doing through these conversations.
I mean, conceptually, I can imagine that when you first had this first idea 17 years ago, that just the acceptance of it, they must have looked at you like you were crazy.
Absolutely.
As opposed to now, this is like, oh, okay, great. It's just another gadget in the house, but although this one is providing all this information to the practitioner.
Yeah.
What kind of challenges did you face over the course of the development?
So there's been a lot from different perspectives. One is simply getting all the content that we need into here. When we're building information around a new disease state, there's really two sets of things that we look at. So I think about sort of the positives and the negatives, right? On the positive side, what are the guidelines and best practices? This right here is our heart failure product. This is out in patients' homes right now. And if a patient is diagnosed with heart failure and set on a treatment path by their doctor, what is that ideal journey? And we know clinically what ideally a patient would be doing along the way. And of course, there's the reality that that ideal journey is the case for pretty much no patient, right? There's always something that happens to everyone along the way, or for many of us, many different things at different times. So on the negative side, we look at what are those challenges or the barriers to adherence. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about managing the symptoms of that disease and how that's going to impact treatment. Side effects of medications, that can be challenging for many patients at many points in time. And the psychosocial issues, stress, anxiety, depression, can actually be big challenges for many patients dealing with the disease on an ongoing basis. So, one of the challenges for us as a company then is getting all that information that goes into there so that, Mibu has everything to talk to that patient about. And there's a whole set of challenges on how do we generate that conversation. So this is not reading from a script. It's not the same thing every time. It's going to start off with some version of, oh, hey, how are you doing today? Or I just wanted to check in on you. And based on that patient's answer can go off in many different directions. So, everything to create that conversation for that patient. And I'd say the last piece of, set of challenges are around getting this into practice. right? As we were just talking about, doing anything new in medicine always takes a long time for good reasons, right? Medicine changes slowly for appropriate reasons. But when we have something new like this, it can take a while to get it out there to patients.
So now that you have the advent of Siri and Alexa and whatnot, to me it seems as though this is a natural segue or what have you. But until such, are you concerned with the technology that's out there already that might cause, or that they might start implementing some healthcare components to that?
Oh, I think it's a very exciting time in terms of so many different companies in the technology space trying to make an impact in healthcare. Right. This is an enormous set of challenges for us to solve. No one company is going to change everything. And I think there's great opportunity for a lot of collaboration across this. If you look at what things like, the so-called smart speakers, right? The Alexa or Google Home or things like Siri on your phone, there's a huge advantage to us now in those being so prominent, which is even when we started this company 4 years ago, that was still the early days of a lot of those, right? Not that long ago, but the concept of talking to a piece of technology, for a certain group of people, they got it, right? Siri had been around for a few years. For the average person, no, that was kind of weird. Fast forward to today, and one of our patients, when we ship this out, even if they don't own one of those, they get the concept, right? Because their friends or their kids or their neighbors have one. And so the concept of talking to something is pretty straightforward. That said, I think each of these devices, even if they're working in healthcare, is solving a different set of problems. Something like a smart speaker is very reactionary and transactional, right? You can ask a question, or you can tell it to do something, or have it give you a reminder, and it's good for that. What we're focused on here is really about how do you build up that relationship with the patient over time. Instead of just saying, give me a reminder for this, or asking a question about something, a conversation with Mibu can commonly, incorporate something like, last week when we talked about, you weren't feeling great, I wanted to follow up on that and see how things are going, or you told me you were going to go see your daughter this weekend, how was that? All right, so it's really about building that relationship and building on those earlier conversations.
So let's talk about safety and HIPAA and privacy. Mm-hmm. How does that come into play, and what kind of protection did you have to do?
Yeah, so I think anything you're doing in healthcare, those are obviously very important, right? Data security and privacy. Everything that we build is HIPAA and high-tech compliant from the ground up. We go to a lot of effort to educate patients on where their data is, what data is being gathered, who is it being shared with, right? So you're talking to this, and she's asking questions and you're responding, but that data is also going back to your doctor or your nurse. And we want to make sure we're really clear with patients on that. And we definitely do a lot of work around the privacy and security of this data to try to ensure that it remains private and secure.
So why don't you give us an example? Let's see Mibu.
Absolutely.
Let's see Mibu working.
So this one is set up as kind of our demonstration of our heart failure products. I'm just going to tap her screen. All right, so let's have her say hi here.
Hello there, I'm Mibu, a wellness coach from Catalia Health. I help people stay engaged with their treatment program and on top of their medications.
How can you help?
I can help people by checking in on their symptoms, providing education on their condition, and reminding people to take their medicine. May I share an example of how I can help a patient named Edgar with congestive heart failure or CHF?
So just a quick, couple words on this before she goes on more. This one's obviously set up, to do demos with, right? So showing off the main features over and over. What she'll do next is kind of like a typical conversation with a patient, which I'll show you in 1 second. In terms of the robotics, fairly simple. There's a half a dozen motors in here. There's a camera that she's using to look out and find, where your face is so she can make eye contact. Obviously a microphone because she's listening. Now, the audio or the video never gets sent off of here. So all the processing is done locally. So it's also different than the devices we were just talking about. It's not always listening, and it's only responding to, when she asks a question or makes a statement, listening for my response in the next few seconds. After that, she'll turn off and not constantly listen. So let's say yes.
So the patient has to engage with her first.
The patient can engage with her first, or in one of the first conversations say, what time do you usually take this medication? Do you want me to remind you then? And if they say yes, she can say, I can wake up and remind you. I can wake up and sing you a song, some Mibu special songs. I can send you a text, right? So this helps to create that relationship with the patient for the reasons we were talking about. But this is not the only way that we interact with our patients. It can be automated text or phone calls or an app. It could be a person calling at certain times. But this really helps to create that ongoing relationship. So hello there.
How are you doing, Edgar?
Terrible. I appreciate that.
Since the last time we talked, have you been feeling short of breath?
A little bit.
Okay, you feel a little bit short of breath. Are you having trouble breathing in and out?
So I'll explain a little bit what she's doing here, which is, she starts off just, oh, hey, how are you doing? Right? And if I'd said, I'm great, maybe, oh, can I give you a tip on something? Or, how's the weather? She might go into some small talk, depending on the patient. We're actually learning about each person and what they like and don't like about interacting with this. But I said, I'm feeling terrible. And so she wants to know not just that, right? We're not just going to tell the doctor, oh, this patient's not doing well. We want to understand why. We want to understand what's going on. In the case of heart failure, we're going to go through a set of questions that a doctor or nurse might if they were talking to that patient so that we can get that information back to them. Right? And so now if something is, in a certain situation, we might send an alert back to the doctor or nurse. But by default, we'll get all that patient's data back in their dashboard that they can look at.
Fascinating. So in an emergent situation, though, she wouldn't be able to identify that there's something happening at that
Correct.
immediate
So we're
moment.
not trying to handle the emergency situations.
Right.
And in the first conversation that she has with a patient, she explains that very clearly. We'll remind them every once in a while. If I say I'm feeling terrible and, kind of gets worse from here, she's going to say, hey, if this is really bad, you might want to call 911 or your doctor, right? So she'll give that advice to patients, but this is not a device that is going to call 911 on your behalf. As I said, she's kind of directing the conversation and listening for answers to the questions she asks or the statements that she makes. And there are a few things that you could say to her outside of that, but unfortunately she doesn't know that one yet.
Okay, well, probably because she's dealing with a different community. Okay, so let's talk about the patient base that we're not necessarily in the study, but who's utilizing it today.
So the way that we deploy this is around specific disease states.
Okay.
So there are 3 that we've started with. One is heart failure, like we've been talking about here. And these are typically patients who have been recently diagnosed and are now going home from the hospital. We want to help keep them home, right? So that if anything's going wrong, we can address it as soon as possible and prevent that person from coming back to the hospital. We're also doing work in rheumatoid arthritis and in late-stage kidney cancer. So it's very diverse. And this is really...
How do you pick those?
Well, so this was going to say, right? So we don't pick them, right?
Right.
Our customers do. We work with providers. We work with pharma, right? Entities that today are providing care for patients, and we're helping them to leverage technology like this to do that at bigger scale. Now, our goal is to get this out to more and more patients across a number of different disease states. This is where we're starting, and there's quite a bit more in the works for the next few years.
And what's the cost involved to a patient?
To a patient, in every case right now, it's free. So a patient is getting this either because they're on a particular drug or because they've been discharged with a certain condition.
So it's being subsidized by the pharmaceutical company or
by the provider.
By the provider, okay. Very interesting. And how many patients have this right now?
So it's a relatively small number. We just started deploying these in the middle of 2018, but it's starting to scale up.
So I know you had said you had engaged IDEO for the design. How did you put the rest of your team together?
So we have a very diverse team at Catelleya Health in terms of backgrounds. Obviously, we're building technology.
Right.
About a third of the company, or maybe a little bit more, has technology backgrounds, right? Building the hardware and mostly the software on that side. A lot of the team is focused on the content that's in here. And so the way that we think about that is everything that Mibu says needs to be clinically accurate. Right? We don't want to say the wrong thing to a patient, but it also has to be very patient-friendly. Right? We don't want it to sound like a medical textbook. And so the content side of the team is a mix between clinicians and writers. Right, so we want to make sure we put all these pieces together in the right way. And our clinical team has a couple of jobs here. So one is what I was just talking about, helping to put together all the content. But another piece of it is integrating with our customers. Right? Not so much from a technical perspective, but from a workflow perspective. We were talking about this earlier. Making sure we fit into clinical workflow is the way that this ends up getting adopted on the clinical side. So we spent a lot of time thinking about that piece of it. And then we also put together outside collaborations. So for example, our heart failure product, we're working with the American Heart Association. So all of their content can be accessible through this for our patients so that we have a lot that we can talk to patients about relevant to their disease state and their treatment.
And learn behaviors and whatnot?
Mibu is constantly learning about and adapting to a person. Okay, so we start some things right out of the box. In the first few minutes, after she starts up, she's going to tell that patient a corny joke. Many of our patients think it's pretty funny.
Does she change the joke depending upon the demographic of that patient?
Not to start, right? Because we don't know anything about them yet.
Okay.
Right? Imagine you've just met someone, and maybe it's part of your personality to tell corny jokes, and you do, right? A small portion of our patients think it's the dumbest thing they've ever heard. We want to know that right away. Right? In that latter case, oh, I'm sorry, I won't do that anymore. Right? Just like as we are meeting someone and getting to know them, we're going to change the way that we interact, right? For people that we know for a while, we talk to each person in a slightly different way. Yeah. We do that fairly intuitively as humans. What we're looking at here is the psychology behind that kind of thing so we can adapt to them. Now, the joke is kind of a quick example to illustrate. A lot of it has to do with learning style and how we communicate to someone. If we think about a clinician who we say has good bedside manner, we don't mean that she or he knows more or less medicine than the next person. We mean that they're better at empathizing with patients. Some people this comes very naturally to, some people not so much, right? We look at what are those things that actually do make a difference and think about that when we're building these algorithms to adapt to a patient. For example, one person we might want to just say, here's what you need to do, because all they want to know is like what to do and they're going to follow it. The next person might want to say, here's what you need to do, and here's why, and here's how you're going to go about it, right, through that whole explanation. And so those are the kinds of things that we do to learn about and adapt to each person. And again, some of that happens right away in that first conversation. Sometimes it'll take a few days or a few weeks before we learn more about that individual.
And how long do you anticipate that Mibu would be staying with a patient?
So Mibu's going to stay with someone for different lengths of time depending on what condition we're dealing with and who our customer is. If we look at a lot of what we're doing in heart failure, a lot of the providers are going to care more about 30 or 90-day readmission rates. Mm-hmm. So patients might have this for 1 to 3 months. Everything we're doing are in chronic conditions, so in other cases it could be months or years that a patient is going to use this. So it really just varies quite a bit.
And what are you seeing in terms of patient compliance and adherence to the protocols that they've been prescribed?
So one thing that we've seen with this is this is very successful at creating that engagement over time. When we did earlier trials that were time limited, one of the challenges is at the end of it, patients wouldn't give these back to us, right? A good problem to have.
Happy holidays, they pass it off to their grandchildren, right?
No, they wanted to keep it.
Oh.
When I did the first randomized controlled trial a dozen years ago, patients had these for a couple months. Called them to try to schedule a follow-up visit, and patients who had one of these robots started trying to negotiate on the phone. It's really like a friend, how about a couple more weeks? Or, can I have her for another month? She's like a family member. Yeah. And the other thing that we're seeing now is for our heart failure patients, if you do the basic check-in, which we started to do here, you can do it in about 3 minutes. And we have a group of patients that spends about 3 minutes a day talking to Mibu. We have another group of patients that can have that same conversation in 10, 20, 30 minutes. And their biggest complaint is there's not enough for her to talk to them about. And so we have very different personalities, obviously, right? People range a lot. And what we're doing is trying to adapt to those different people to be able to do that. What we are seeing across all those patients, whether they're spending 3 minutes or 20 minutes, is we are getting those check-ins most days. And we're getting the majority of patients to check in at least once every 48 hours. And so what that means is we're able to then get that data back to the clinicians and provide the follow-up care.
It's remarkable. So I'm just curious, how did you come up with the name Mibu?
So when we started this company a few years ago, we were trying to brainstorm a product name, and we wanted something short, pronounceable, you could trademark, get a domain name for. We quickly ran out of words in the English language. One of our early employees was of Japanese heritage, and that was one of the languages we were brainstorming in. And it's actually short for 2 Japanese words, mabudashi and mabutaki. One is friend and one is blink, both of which are very relevant here. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Okay. And the color yellow?
So when we were working with IDEO a few years ago, the first 6 or 8 of these were each 3D printed, hand finished, hand painted, and were all a different color in a palette that we were looking at. Now, where we're going in the next few years, as we really start to scale this up, if a patient's getting one of these, hey, you're going to get one, what color, what eye color do you want? Right now, the yellow actually tested best with patients. So the first sets of these are all this color.
So for 2019, you have 2 more products that you're launching. Yes. What's next?
So for us, a lot of 2019 is about scaling this. Within the 3 disease states that we're working in, being able to get this out to more and more patients, and then about building applications in other disease states, putting together outside partnerships and continuing to develop a lot of content ourselves.
Well, I thank you so much for joining us today. And
Thanks
thank you so much
for
bringing Mibu. I think
Absolutely.
She's absolutely adorable. And can I take her home with me?
We'll see about getting you one.
Thank you, Dr. Kidd.
Thank you.
This is Redefining Medtech.